In the dim hush of twilight, where the Missouri woods swallowed the last gasps of daylight like a beast devouring its prey, Elias Hawthorne stumbled upon the remnants of a life long buried. The year was 1860, and the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and unspoken sins. He was a man of the mountains, his frame carved from the same unyielding rock as the Appalachian ridges that clawed at the sky, but tonight, something stirred in the shadows that no axe could fell. The cabin creaked under the weight of secrets, its walls whispering tales of isolation where families turned inward, bound by blood in ways that twisted the soul. Elias paused at the threshold, his lantern flickering like a dying star, casting elongated shadows that danced across the rough-hewn floor. His mother, Abigail, sat by the hearth, her eyes hollow pits reflecting the embers' glow. She was a woman worn thin by the relentless grip of the wilderness, her once vibrant spirit eroded by years of solitude and the relentless chorus that echoed from the trees after sundown. Those voices, low, insistent murmurs that slithered through the cracks in the logs, speaking in tongues older than the hills themselves. They promised protection from the encroaching world, from famine and fever, but demanded a price that no sane mind could pay. As the wind howled outside, carrying fragments of those spectral calls, Elias felt the pull deep in his bones. The rituals had begun innocently enough, generations ago, when the first settlers heeded the whispers to seal their lineage against outsiders. But now, in this forsaken corner of Missouri, the demands grew darker. Abigail's gaze met his, a silent plea laced with terror, yet beneath it lurked a resignation that chilled him more than the autumn frost. The voices grew louder, insistent, weaving through his thoughts like roots burrowing into soil. They spoke of unity, of flesh merging with flesh to defy the decay of time. He stepped closer, the floorboards groaning in protest, and in that moment, the boundary between duty and damnation blurred into oblivion. The woods outside seemed to hold their breath, watching, waiting for the cycle to turn once more. What horrors would unfold in the heart of this hidden mystery? The night was young, and the voices were hungry. The gravel road ended where the map lied, swallowed by a tangle of kudzu and rusted barbed wire that no one had bothered to mend since the Eisenhower years. Dr. Mara Whitlock killed the engine of her rented Jeep and sat listening to the tick of cooling metal, the only sound for miles except the low, ceaseless drone of cicadas buried somewhere in the laurel thickets. She had driven 12 hours from St. Louis on little more than rumor and a single line in a courthouse ledger dated October 1860, matter of the Hawthorne kin, removed from docket by order of Judge Ransom, reason sealed. The county seat had burned in 1921, taking most records with it, but that one scorched page had survived in a mason jar under a clerk's porch. When Mara read the names, Elias Hawthorne, Abigail Hawthorne, unnatural offense, something cold settled behind her ribs. She was not academic curiosity anymore, it was a hook. The town, if it could still be called that, was nothing but a scatter of double-wides and a shuttered general store with a faded Pepsi sign swinging from one hinge. A hand-painted board nailed to a pine read Welcome to Lost Hollow, POP 38. Someone had crossed out the 8 and written 6 in bleeding red marker. Mara counted 5 mailboxes on the drive-in. The place smelled of wet leaves and coal smoke drifting from invisible chimneys. An old man in a seed cap watched her from the porch of a tar-paper house, rocking so slowly the chair might have been moving itself. When she lifted a hand in greeting, he spat tobacco juice into the weeds and disappeared inside without a word. That was the welcome. Mara had come for the cabin marked on an 1858 survey map, a black square labeled only E. Hawthorne, at the edge of a ridge locals now called Hangnail Knob. No road reached it anymore, the forest had reclaimed everything. She shouldered her pack, notebook, voice recorder, headlamp, bear spray she hoped she wouldn't need, and started up the trace that might once have been a wagon track. Rhododendron slapped at her legs. The higher she climbed, the quieter the woods became, as if the trees themselves leaned in to listen. By the time the ridge flattened, dusk was pooling under the canopy like spilled ink. There, half collapsed into the mountainside, stood the cabin. Logs silvered by time, chimney fallen in on itself, roof sagging like a broken spine. Yet the doorframe was newly scarred, pale wounds in the dark wood where someone had pried away the padlock within the last year. Mara's pulse hammered in her ears. She had not told a soul where she was going. No one alive, she realized with a chill, even knew this place still existed. She stepped over the threshold, and the air inside felt thick, almost wet, carrying a faint sweetness of rot and something else, tallow, maybe, or old blood baked into the floorboards. Her flashlight beam swept across the single room and stopped on a cradle boarded over with fresh pine planks. Someone had been here. Recently. And they had left the voices waiting. The cradle rocked once by itself, a slow, deliberate sway that made the fresh pine boards creak like knuckles. Mara froze in the doorway, flashlight trembling in her grip, the beam jittering across the walls until it landed on a dark rectangle flush with the floorboards near the hearth. A trapdoor, edges worn smooth by generations of hands. Someone had pried it recently too, the iron ring glinted with new scratches. She knelt, heart punching against her ribs, and lifted. The door came up with a sigh of mold and trapped winter air. A ladder of hand-hewn locust rungs disappeared into blackness. The smell that rose was worse down there, sweet rot, candle smoke, and something coppery, like a butcher's block left in the rain. She hesitated only long enough to thumb on her recorder and clip it to her collar, then started down. 10 rungs. 12. Her boots touched packed earth. The cellar was larger than the cabin above, a root cellar widened into something closer to a chapel. Walls sweated moisture, roots from a long-dead chestnut tree had punched through the ceiling like pale fingers. In the middle of the floor lay a low stone altar blackened by old fire, and on it rested a book no bigger than a hymnal, bound in cracked calfskin the color of dried liver. Mara's light trembled over the cover. No title. Only a brand burned deep, a circle bisected by 2 crossing lines that almost formed an H, Hawthorne. She opened it with fingers that felt suddenly too large. The first page was dated March 3, 1860, ink faded to rust brown but still legible in a cramped, angry hand. They are louder tonight. The ridge speaks with one tongue now, and it says the line must not thin. The outsiders bring sickness and law. Only the old way keeps the land from taking us back. Elias listens too well. God forgive me, I listen too. Page after page followed, written by Abigail Hawthorne in bursts between chores and fevers. Descriptions of voices threading through the wind, telling her the soil itself was thirsty for pure blood. Instructions, half prayer, half threat, the mother must receive the son when the dogwood blooms, else the harvest fails and the children waste. Sketches in the margins showed interlocking circles, crude bodies tangled in ways that turned Mara's stomach. Halfway through, the handwriting changed, larger, wilder strokes. Elias had taken the pen. She is ripe with it now. The voices sing inside her like bees. I done what was asked and the land is quieted for a spell. But it hungers again. Mara's breath fogged in the cold. She turned another page and the paper crackled like thin ice. A pressed dogwood blossom, brown and brittle, fluttered to the dirt. The voices Abigail feared weren't wind anymore, they were here, brushing the nape of Mara's neck with fingers that had no weight at all. The journal's pages grew feverish after Elias took the pen. The careful, pleading script of a mother gave way to a man writing as though the quill were burning his palm. April 19, 1860. The voices have faces now. They come at dusk wearing the skins of the old ones, Grandfather Jehu, Aunt Mercy, even little Ruth who died in the flux of 43. They stand at the edge of the clearing and beckon with hands that drip creek water. They say the ridge is a mouth and we are its teeth. If the teeth fall out, the mouth closes forever. Blood must sharpen blood. May 2nd. Planted corn today. The furrows ran red before the seed went in. I cut my arm and let it drip between the hills. The ground drank quick. That night the voices laughed like women at a quilting bee. Abigail heard them too. She pressed her belly to the windowsill and wept without sound. The child inside her kicks when they speak. June 14th. Dogwood shed its blossoms weeks ago, yet one tree still blooms white as bone. Only one. It grows straight out the grave of Grandfather Jehu, though we buried him on the far slope. Elias says the tree moved itself. I say he is losing the difference between dream and waking. He smiles the way a wolf smiles before it takes the throat. July 27th. The heat is unholy. Flies coat the walls like black plaster. Abigail's time is near. She begged me to ride for the midwife in Potosi. I told her no horse could find the trace anymore, the woods have knitted shut behind us. Truth is, I dare the last entry Elias ever wrote was dated August 9, 1860. The ink had bled where tears or sweat struck the page, turning the letters into bruises. She screamed for 3 hours. I held the knife ready in case the voices demanded more than the birthing. They didn't. They only sang, low and sweet, the same lullaby grandmother sang to the twins before she smothered them in the yellow fever summer. When the child came, it was a girl, slick with arsin, eyes already open and looking straight at me like she knew whose seed had quickened her. Abigail turned her face to the wall and would not touch the babe. I cut the cord with the same blade I use for hogs. The voices hushed the moment the afterbirth hit the floorboards, as if the ridge itself had taken a satisfied breath. Abigail bled for days. Not the clean bleeding of a woman brought to bed, but slow, dark, endless. She lay in the corner on a straw tick and stared at the rafters the way a trapped fox stares at the trapper. Sometimes she whispered to the empty air, "It wasn't him, it was the mountain that lay with me." Sometimes she laughed until the blood bubbled at her lips. I wrapped the infant in my only clean shirt and carried her to the stone altar beneath the floor. The voices told me what to name her, Mercy, after the aunt who hanged herself from the dogwood in 51. They said the circle was closed now, mother to son to daughter, and the land would spare us another season. They lied. On the 7th night Abigail rose. Moonlight came through the chinks and painted her bones silver. She walked barefoot across the puncheon floor leaving prints of blood. I woke to find her standing over the cradle I had nailed together from apple crates. In her hand was the skinning knife. She looked at me with eyes gone milky, same as grandfather's before he walked into the creek and never came up. She said, "The ridge wants the girl back. It always wants the girl." I took the knife from her the way you take a bone from a dog, gentle, so she wouldn't bite. She let me. Then she lay down again and never spoke another word any living soul could hear. The voices took her tongue for their own. By morning she was cold, burning with fever, whispering to shadows that wore my face and hers twisted together like roots. The child cried once, sharp, like a hawk. After that she only watched, those old eyes waiting for the next turning of the wheel. Mara climbed the ladder with the journal clutched to her chest like contraband. When her head cleared the floorboards the cabin felt different, colder, as though the walls had inched closer while she was below. The cradle still rocked, but slower now, a pendulum running out of time. She told herself it was the wind pushing through the collapsed chimney, yet the air inside was perfectly still. She stepped outside to breathe and the forest answered. The first voice was so soft she thought it was her own pulse in her ears. Then it separated itself, a woman's murmur sliding between the trunks, "Mercy. Mercy." It came from everywhere and nowhere, the way sound does inside a seashell. Mara swung the flashlight in frantic arcs. Nothing moved except the mist curling ankle-high over the dead leaves. She retreated to the threshold, half in, half out, afraid to turn her back on either dark in either direction. The second voice was deeper, male, patient as stone, the line must not thin. It rose from the ground itself, vibrating up through the soles of her boots. A third joined, a child's piping laugh that skipped across the ridge like a thrown pebble. The voices layered, braided, became a single throat speaking with many tongues. Mara's recorder, still clipped to her collar, picked up everything. She heard it later and wished she hadn't. The voices were not behind the words, they were the words, wearing the shapes of human speech the way a hunter wears a deerskin. Something brushed her cheek, light as spider silk. She slapped at it and her hand came away wet. Not rain. The mist had thickened into something warmer, slick. When she shone the light upward she saw droplets beating on the underside of the laurel leaves, dark as pokeberry juice. One fell, struck the back of her wrist, and ran like a tear. Inside the cabin the cradle stopped rocking. In its place rose a new sound, wet, rhythmic, the soft slap of bare feet on puncheon boards. Slow footsteps crossing the room toward her. Mara backed away until the porch rail caught her hips. The footsteps reached for the bear spray, fingers numb, and realized she had left it in the Jeep 12 miles down a trail that no longer seemed to exist. The footsteps reached the doorway and paused. Moonlight spilled across the threshold but showed nothing except the faint print of a woman's foot outlined in drying blood. Another print appeared beside it while she watched, fresh, steaming faintly in the cold. The voices gathered into one clear sentence spoken inches from her ear, warm breath stirring the fine hairs at her nape. "You read what was hidden. Now carry what was read." The trail down hangnail knob had changed while she was inside the cabin. Trees that had stood apart now leaned together, forming a tunnel of black trunks and dripping leaves. Mara's headlamp cut only a few feet ahead before the dark swallowed the beam hole. She walked anyway, journal pressed to her ribs, because staying felt worse than moving. Halfway to where the jeep should have been, a lantern appeared between the trunks, yellow, steady, impossible. An old man stepped into its circle of light. He wore a wool coat patched with feed sackcloth and carried a hickory staff worn smooth at the grip. His face was all creases and hollows, the kind of face that had never left these hills. "You the one been pokin' round the Hawthorne place," he said. "Not a question." Mara's mouth was too dry for words. She nodded. He studied her the way a butcher studies a side of beef, then spat a stream of tobacco juice that hissed when it hit the leaves. "Name's Caleb Ransom. My granddaddy was the judge what sealed them records in '60. Family shame, he called it. Family duty, I call it." He lifted the lantern higher. The light caught on something metal pinned to his coat, a tarnished sheriff's badge, old pattern, 19th century. "Still runs in the blood," he said, tapping it. "Same as what runs in yours now." Mara took a step back. The trail behind her had vanished, the ground felt spongy, as though the ridge itself were breathing. "Voices told you to carry, didn't they?" Caleb's voice dropped to a murmur that matched the wind in the laurels. "They always do. First they ask polite. Then they take what's owed. My sister heard in '78. Walked into the creek with her baby girl and kept walking till the water closed over both. Found 3 days later tangled in roots, smiling like they was asleep." He moved closer. The lantern flame did not waver even when the wind rose. "Ain't no leavin' clean, Miss Doctor. The ridge keeps a ledger. Hawthorne blood paid in 1860. Then again in 1904. Again in '33 when the mines shut and hunger come. Every time the outside world gets too close, the mountain calls its tithe. Pure blood, close blood. Keeps the rest of us safe." Mara's heel sank into mud that had not been there minutes ago. She looked down and saw her own footprints filling with dark water as though the ground were bleeding upward. Caleb extended one gnarled hand, palm up. In it lay a single dogwood blossom, white and perfect, though every dogwood for miles had gone brown weeks ago. "Take it," he said softly. "Or leave it. Either way, the wheel's already turning." Mara took the blossom because her hand moved before her mind could stop it. The petals were warm, almost feverish, and left a faint red stain on her fingers like crushed berries. Caleb's lantern swung away and the darkness rushed in behind him, erasing the trail entirely. She was alone again, but the woods felt crowded now, thick with unseen watchers. She stumbled downhill for what felt like hours until the ground leveled and she burst into a clearing she had not seen on the way up. A circle of foundation stones, blackened by fire, ringed a rusted iron stake driven deep into the earth. Chains lay coiled around it like dead snakes. Someone had been burned here, and not long ago. The char was still glossy in places. On the far side of the clearing stood a sagging barn, doors hanging open. Mara's headlamp caught rows of filing cabinets inside, green military surplus, padlocked, dripping with condensation. A makeshift archive in the middle of nowhere. She forced the nearest drawer. Inside were ledger books, courthouse records, birth and death certificates going back to territorial days, all stamped with the same circled H brand burned into Elias Hawthorne's journal. She pulled one volume at random, 1860. The pages had been sliced out with a razor, neat as surgery, leaving only stubs. But someone had missed a corner. A single scrap remained, dated October 14th. By order of Judge Ransom and Sheriff Obadiah Ransom, the matter of Elias and Abigail Hawthorne is hereby removed from public view. Bodies of mother and infant interred in secret on the ridge. Male subject taken to the county seat for examination, found non-compos mentis, escaped custody same night. All witnesses paid or persuaded. The ridge is quiet again. Below, in fresher ink, a later hand had added, 1904, repeat. 1933, repeat. 1978, repeat. Each followed by a tiny sketched dogwood. Another drawer held Polaroids. Grainy shots of women with the same hollow cheekbones as Abigail's sketch, bellies swollen, standing in front of this very barn. The most recent photo was dated last spring. The woman in it could not have been older than 20, eyes already dead, hand resting protectively over the curve under her apron. On the back, written in ballpoint, Mercy Ruth Ransom, delivered stillborn May 3rd. Ridge satisfied. Mara's knees buckled. The clearing tilted. She understood now why the population sign had been changed from 38 to 36. 2 more names would soon be crossed off whatever invisible list the mountain kept. From the tree-line came the soft clink of chains being gathered, link by link, patient as a heartbeat. The clinking stopped the instant Mara turned. A shape detached itself from the black wall of trees and stepped into the clearing as though the night had birthed it. Tall, barefoot, wearing a man's flannel shirt that hung to her knees and nothing else. Moonlight silvered the swell of her belly, high, tight, unmistakably late. Her hair was the same ash brown as the woman in the newest Polaroid, but longer, matted with leaves and something darker. When she moved, the chains dragged behind her like a bridal train. The woman's eyes caught the headlamp and reflected it back flat and animal. She tilted her head, listening to something Mara could not hear, then smiled with teeth too small for an adult mouth. "You read the book," she said. Her voice was soft, childish, but the words came out layered, as if several throats spoke at once. "Mama Abigail said someone would come read it and carry the knowing outward." I waited. Mara's tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. The woman took another step. The chains made no sound now, the ground seemed to swallow the links. "I'm Mercy Ruth," she said, stroking the curve of her stomach. "Third Mercy Ruth. The ridge likes threes. First one died with grandmother Abigail. Second one walked into the creek with my aunt. This one," she patted the swell again, almost tenderly, "will be the fourth." But the voices changed their minds. They don't want another girl buried. They want the story carried. She lifted the chains. They were not attached to anything, she simply held them, letting the cold iron spill over her wrists like jewelry. "Granddaddy Caleb said you'd fight. He always says that. Then he brings the dogwood and they stop fighting." Mara backed up until the rusted stake pressed between her shoulder blades. The woman, Mercy, kept coming, slow, barefoot over charcoal and sharp stones without flinching. When she was an arm's length away, Mara saw the brand on her collarbone, the same circled H, raw and fresh, still weeping. Mercy raised the chains until they brushed Mara's cheek. They were warm, pulsing faintly, as though wrapped around something alive beneath the iron. "You can run downhill," Mercy whispered, breath sweet with rot and milk, "but the ridge runs faster. Or you can take what I took, finish what Mama Abigail started. One night only. Then the voices let you leave." They promised. Her free hand slid to the buttons of the flannel shirt, began undoing them one by one. The swell of her belly gleamed like wet marble in the headlamp. "Listen," she said, and cocked her head again. From every direction the voices rose, no longer whispers but a choir, hungry and certain, singing a single word in perfect, terrible unison. Mara, the headlamp died first, a soft pop and then darkness thick enough to chew. Mara ran, not choosing direction, only away from the choir that knew her name. Branches whipped her face, roots caught her ankles, but the ridge let her run exactly far enough to believe escape was possible. Then the ground tilted and she pitched forward, arms out, into a tangle of laurel so dense the leaves closed over her like water. She came to with her cheek pressed to cold iron. The chains. Mercy had slipped them around her wrists while she was stunned. They were loose enough to move in, tight enough that every heartbeat made the links bite. A single dogwood blossom had been threaded through the hasp like a lover's token. The voices were quiet now, satisfied, waiting. Mara crawled until the chains stopped her short. 10 feet away the woman sat cross-legged on the burned ground, shirt open, belly gleaming, rocking gently. She was humming the lullaby from the journal, the one grandmother sang before she smothered the twins. When she saw Mara was awake she smiled the small-toothed smile again. "Almost morning," she said. "Ridge only needs one night. Then you carry the story out clean." That was the new bargain. Mara's fingers found the hasp. The blossom crumbled at her touch, releasing a puff of red dust that smelled like the cellar altar. The chains loosened, not much, just enough for hope. She worked them over her raw wrists, skin tearing, until one hand came free. Then the other. Mercy watched without alarm, as though it had all happened before. Mara ran again. This time the trees parted. The trail reappeared exactly where it had been 12 hours earlier, Jeep untouched, keys still in the ignition. She threw herself behind the wheel and the engine turned over on the first try. Headlights carved a tunnel through the dark and she followed it downhill, faster, faster, until the ridge was only a black shape in the rearview mirror. At the county line the chains lay in the passenger seat, warm, pulsing faintly. She had no memory of bringing them. The dogwood blossom sat on the dash, fresh again, petals perfect white. She drove straight through to St. Louis and did not stop until the arching sunlight struck the river. Only then did she look at her reflection in the windshield. Her eyes were the same color they had always been, but something behind them had shifted, settled, taken root. Sometimes, late at night, she wakes to the soft clink of iron on hardwood and finds a single white petal on her pillow, edges already browning. The voices never speak anymore. They don't need to. The story is inside her now, growing the way a seed grows in perfect darkness, patient, certain, waiting for spring.